Hey guys, I figured while I've got this radio taken apart, I might as well spruce up the cabinet a little bit. So what I've done so far is I gave it a good cleaning with some Gojo waterless hand cleaner and then wiped it down with some mineral spirits. And it's certainly looking better. I then unscrewed the top and glued up the loose veneer, so it's nice and solid. And I kind of went back and forth in my mind about what do I want to do. Can I salvage this finish? I want to refinish it. And I've decided that I am going to refinish it. It just doesn't look that good. There are some areas where there's no finish left. We're just down to the wood. And the finish that is remaining is pretty loose, flaking off. And I just don't see any easy way to salvage it. If I was to clear coat over this, I think it's just going to keep flaking off and deteriorating. Not as much, but eventually, you know, when you've got a bad base, putting more stuff on top of it generally isn't going to work out so well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with this board because it's straightforward to work on. It's fairly small and manageable. Now the inside is in good condition, and certainly the rest of the cabinet was like this. I would definitely not be stripping it down. I've already cleaned this up, like I said, with the mineral spirits, and what I'm going to do with this is I am just going to clear coat. I really want to preserve that label especially. That's pretty nice there. This for the other side. I am going to use, I'm going to use this stuff, which is a fairly mild stripper. I think it's basically like lacquer thinner and acetone. It does not have any methyl ethyl chloride, which you really don't need to strip old finishes like this. They just melt off really easily. You can also make up your own, like a 50-50 mix of acetone and lacquer thinner. A little steel wool works really quite well to get this old stuff off. As for the new finish, well, once I get this stripped down, I am going to use a light medium walnut on the inner surfaces and use a dark walnut on the outer trim, which as near as I can make out is how it was originally. The main cabinet's actually in quite good condition. For this, on the inside, I wiped it down with a diluted solution of ammonia. I read about that tip somewhere. I think the Anti-Radio Forum, or Philco Radio Forum. And in spite of it appearing to have gotten wet and the rusty chassis and all that, it's actually in pretty darn good shape on the inside. There's really no warpage or anything. So on this, I'm going to remove these hinges and this metal slidey thing that keeps the lid open. Get down to just the bare wood components, and then I'll strip this too. There's a little bit of veneer separation here I want to deal with. This seems to be like the worst area where it got damp, and right around this control it got a little bit warped. Just need a little bit of glue in there and clamp that down. It should be fine. See, there's quite a bit of finish loss here too on the trim, on this front edge here. This is just bare wood. See a little trace of an old finish left here. That's why I think I really don't have much option. I just strip it. Also along the bottom here, this edge, quite a bit of finish loss here. There are also some citrus-based strippers out there that work quite well, but I got a feeling this old finish is going to just fall right off. So I got some steel wool here, put a little bit on. You should really wear gloves when you do this. But I found that if I don't get the stuff on my hands too much and clean them off, it's really not that bad. Methyl ethyl chloride stuff, you definitely want to wear heavy gloves when you use that stuff, because that will really mess up your skin. Alright, and then I just take like a napkin and wipe it up. And just like that, we're down to bare wood. So no messy slop to clean up or scrape off, and no goo. And this wood is actually in pretty darn good condition, considering its age and how beat up it looks. It's pretty tight grain too. I'm pretty sure this is quarter cut walnut, so the grain filling it should be fairly easy. I've got the lid completely stripped, as well as a portion of the main cabinet. I've also prepared the back by spraying it with a couple light coats of lacquer sanding sealer. I want to protect this while I'm working on the other side. What I want to do next is get some grain filler going on this, because it takes a while to set up. So I got some Constantine's paste wood filler walnut. I'm going to pop this open, mix it up good, dilute it a little bit with some mineral spirits, and spread it on. And while that's setting up, I will continue stripping the rest of this cabinet. I've got the grain filler mixed up to a nice thick consistency, and I'm starting to put it on here. I want to work it down good into all the wood pores. And if you're wondering what is the slop and why am I putting it on this board, well, if you want to get a nice smooth finish, this is really the way to go. Alternately, you could put on layer after layer of shellac or lacquer and sand, and more layers and more sanding until it's perfectly smooth. However, not only is it a lot of work and wasteful of material, but you'll find over time, especially with lacquer, that the grain will start showing through again, because lacquer continues to shrink for a long time after you put it on. So what this is, it's I believe a silicate type material. So like, think of it as like really finely ground sand, I suppose, with some type of binding agent, and then they add pigment to make it this nice brown color. So you work it into the pores, and as the solvents dry out, this will get gummier and gummier, and at the point where it gets really hazy looking, you want to start getting the excess off. In the past, I've tried the traditional technique of using burlap and going against the grain, which works okay, but I found that I would end up taking too much material off, and I would have to do a second pass, or I would have to do a few layers of lacquer and sand to get it to completely smooth. Lately what I've been doing is scraping off the excess, either with like an expired credit card or a straight-edged razor blade, kind of like this action. Of course, you need to wait till it sets up a lot more than this, otherwise you're not really getting it down in there very well. This will take a few hours to set up, especially because the weather has gotten cooler again. Had a nice warm spell, but now we're down into the 40s again, so everything's taking longer to dry. Once the grain filler got hazy looking, I took a credit card and swiped at a 45-degree angle. After a couple passes, the excess builds up on the edge here, and whenever I found an area that didn't seem to be filled in fully, I would just mush down some of this excess and then scrape it again. And it all seems to be nicely filled in and smooth. After the grain filler set up, I gave it a light sanding and then sprayed on a couple coats of lacquer sanding sealer. Now I'm going to sand this smooth and then put on some toner lacquer. I'm going to use a medium walnut on the central area. I want to mask that off and do the ends and the sides with a color that'll look something like this bottom. I'm going to go with Van Dyke Walnut, which is sort of a dark walnut with a tinge of green, which I think will be a pretty close match to this. I've actually got a cabinet nearby that was done with that toner. Here's a GE810 I did a while back. I did a whole series on this. And I use Van Dyke walnut on the sides of this. And I think that's going to look really nice for the darker areas on this Brunswick radio. I sprayed the top with a couple light coats of the walnut toner lacquer, followed by some clear gloss lacquer. I also got the back side, so that decal is nicely protected now. I'll let that sit up a bit longer, then I'll mask the center area off and spray the edges with the Van Dyke walnuts. In the meantime, I have proceeded with the main cabinet. I finished stripping it down, and now I'm putting grain filler on the veneer areas. I have finished with the grain filler and lacquer sanding sealer, and it's all nice and smooth. Now what I'm preparing to do is mask off the trim areas, and then I'm going to spray the rectangular panel in the middle and on the sides with a light coating of this medium dark walnut Mohawk toner. And after that's cured, I will mask the rectangular areas off and spray all the trim with this Van Dyke walnut toner lacquer. I'm already done with the top. So here's the center with the medium walnut, and here's the Van Dyke on the sides, which I think is a pretty darn good match for the original on the bottom. I do have some chip outs on the bottom, as I feared. That's why this cabinet was never a good candidate for just putting some new lacquer over the old, because this thing got damp at some point during its life, and the old lacquer just is not adhering well to the wood. So even though I put some new coats of lacquer over this, it's chipped off in spots. This happened when I masked off the back while I was spraying the other side. When I pulled the tape away, some of the finish came off. Now this is the inside, so it's not that big a deal. I'll just paint with a brush. I'll put a little more lacquer over there just to protect it, but I suspect this may chip away on the edges over time, but it's not that big a deal. It's only the inside of the lid, and as long as this area stays protected, that's all I really care about. In the corners here, they're originally felt pads. I went to my local home improvement center and found an assortment of black felt pads. I think these will be a pretty good match for what was there originally. Those are to protect the cabinet when the lid is closed. Remember, this is the underside of the lid, this is the hinge side, so when it closes down like this, and the felt pads will rest against the rest of the cabinet. I have the cabinet all masked off, and I'm shaking up my can of Mohawk Van Dyke walnut. And now I'm going to start spraying on some coats. Alright, that should do it. And now for the vertical side trim. After the toner lacquer, I sprayed on a couple coats of gloss. Once this cures up for a couple days, I'll do a light sanding, spray on a couple more coats, a light sanding, and then maybe 2 more final coats. I have found some examples of this radio online that had a pretty good original finish on them, and I think this is a really good match. And here it is with the Brunswick Model A speaker on top. And again, I found photos of this combination online, and this looks just like those do. Which seems a little odd to me because the speaker has a lighter finish than the radio, but I found 3 or 4 examples and that's how they all look, so I guess that's just the finishes they used originally. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up the cabinet restoration. Now back to those rusty chassis.